Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Strenuous Life podcast. This is episode 2 in our series on hybrid conditioning, how to optimize your strength training and your cardio training if you're doing both at the same time. And if you're doing jiu-jitsu, then obviously you do need to optimize both, because it's not only about being strong, it's about being strong repeatedly. And it's not just about having endurance, it's about being strong enough to pull off the things that you want to do, because strength and endurance do matter. Today's guest is Chris Duffin. Chris is a friend of mine. He's a world record-breaking powerlifter. He's also done some insane feats of endurance. I think he's going to be very, very useful to help us understand the mechanisms that we need to optimize to make gains in both areas. Also, just a quick reminder, my book, Perseverance, Life and Death in the Subarctic, is available. It obviously involved strength, and it obviously involved endurance and mental strength, and I think most people will enjoy reading about it. It's available in audiobook format, ebook format, and physical book format anywhere that you get books. It's available on Barnes & Noble, it's available on Indigo and on Amazon and at your independent bookseller. So it's everywhere. Please check it out, and I think you'll like it. Now on to our interview with Chris Duffin. Chris, the last time that you were here, we kind of had a Life of Chris episode, and you've done some amazing things. What I wanted to talk to you about today was much more focused. And it's about the hybrid training, where you're trying to optimize both for strength and for endurance at the same time. And you're a little bit of an anomaly because you're known for being a really, really high-level, record-setting powerlifter. So what qualifies you to have an opinion on mixing endurance training with strength training?
One of the things is just the athlete populations that I work with, right? So in my time, I've worked with every single Major League Baseball team, and between 70 to 80% of the NFL, NBA, and any major sport within college network. I think I've worked with somewhere around 900 colleges, right? And on a coaching basis, work with a lot of hybrid as well as just pure endurance athletes, recognizing the strength component as well as some of the, which we're going to dive into the science of, like, how do you manage performance for a specific technical outcome, right? Because it's, when we think about endurance or conditioning, I think a lot of stuff just gets lumped into this metabolic conditioning pathway. Improving respiration rates, low intensity cardio for long periods of time is just going to play a net across everything. And we're not thinking about all the areas that we can increase our capacity. So back to the qualification, I talked about the athlete populations I worked with. Here's the unique thing is I've done numerous world record endurance feats of strength endurance feats of strength. So when you think about work capacity over a period of time, so I deadlifted the most ever deadlifted in 1 minute. So may not sound like a lot, but do the average work on deadlifting 405 pounds for 60 reps in 60 seconds, and tell me, like, that level of work is just absolutely insane.
In terms of number of pounds lifted in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Right.
That level of work is absolutely insane. You put that level of work in an hour, but now you condense it in that period of time. Squatting. I squatted 500 pounds, 505 pounds for 20 some odd reps in a minute. Same thing, right? That was a Guinness World Record for maybe like 2 months before it inspired someone else that was a squatting freak to beat that. I've deadlifted 400 kilograms. That's 881 pounds every single day for 17 days straight until the tendon detached, which, again, we're going to talk about that because tendon, fascia, like all this actually does play a role in power output over a period of time. I've squatted 800 pounds every single day for 30 days straight.
And that's insane because
it's not possible. I look back on it and I go, that is not possible, right? So when we're thinking about grappling sports, right? When you consider the question of improving performance to match the outcome of that sport, using that just term conditioning, or fitness is rather nebulous. So thinking about that, we're really essentially asking how to increase the average and peak power output over the course of an individual fight or, competitive event. So there's obviously some nuance to that. For example, like the ability to repeat your high power outputs with minimal decrease in average output. Likewise, the athlete's skill level being able to be repeatedly bring that desired result with minimal effort has a significant impact on how efficient output capacity is expanded. So that is a big scalar, is the skill level, right?
Could you give me an example of how skill level plays into it? I mean, let's take something like a squat. People don't think of that as a skilled activity, but it most certainly is.
Yeah.
If you could be strong, and if you don't have the technique, you're going to crumble like a cheap stack of bricks, to come up with a terrible analogy.
Yes. So a lot of people will look at my deadlift and go, well, your deadlift's so easy because you don't even move the bar. Your whatever your limb lengths or this factor that the bar barely moves. And I'm like, actually, go look at the starting position and finish position, and you'll see that the bar is roughly about 20 inches off the ground on each of those. And in fact, I'm 5'11" with a perfectly average ape index. That's wingspan to inseam ratio. I am not biologically built to be a deadlifter over anything. I'm completely average. That's why I've actually squatted 1,000 pounds and deadlifted 1,000 pounds. Again, if we go back to qualifications, I did those for 3 reps. That doesn't sound like a lot, but think about 1,000 pounds on your back for 30 seconds trying to crush you, and the demands of being able to hold that stabilization, that diaphragm, creating that pressure in that is absolutely astronomical. If you watch that 1,000-pound squat, you'll look and you'll see how easy that first rep is, and you'll see that finishing that third rep, I'm about ready to pass out.
What do you imagine your blood pressure was at the end of it?
Oh my God. I don't want to know.
Like, I thought with some leg press, it's obviously easier to measure blood pressure on a leg press than on a. I thought I remembered numbers of like 400 over 200 at the very peak of a leg press. So, you weren't bleeding out the nose like was it Eddie Hall, but that's only because you were lucky, I think.
Well, sometimes when you see those strength athletes bleeding out the nose during an event, obviously high blood pressure, but some of that high blood pressure is also related to the amount of anabolics that an individual's on. So there's certain ones that actually cause that quite a bit. And you'll see it with the large kind of red, purplish face as well. So that has an effect too. So just breaking that down, I'd put everything into a formula. So we talked about what is your average ability, your performance is this increasing the average power output and peak power output over the course of that event, right? Back to the deadlift. So you go, hey, it looks super short because my movement is super efficient, and it creates this look like a magician, this image of the bar is barely moving. But I could also do that same lift and have the bar finish in the same position, and it looks like I have lifted it twice as far because of the movement mechanics I'm using. And literally, I would have done nearly twice as much work than this clean, refined movement pattern where there's no losses or energy leaks. So if we think about removing energy leaks, and for grapplers, you just got to reflect back to when you first started the sport and remembering that first month and how sapped you were, just destroyed from a conditioning to do. And then all of a sudden it just starts getting, and pretty soon to your point, like, oh, I I'm not even like sweating. I'm not working that hard. I'm not even getting a conditioning workout that much anymore once you get to a really high skill level. Does that conversation strike home?
100%.
Yeah,
You can dog it much easier once your skill gets higher, which is why you need to start doing your conditioning separately.
exactly. But early on, you don't need to be doing the conditioning separately because that first month, I mean, it's your conditioning is just training, but that's because you have that scalar for your efficiency is just driving that up. So we have to take that into reference. And that's important to think about in that context too, because it is, if we want to increase our performance over a period of time, the higher level of skill I have, the easier it's going to be for me. So if we multiply that scalar across, all of these arenas. So one would be the change in power, average power, the change in maximum power, and then the last one being the change in your repeat ability. So every repeat effort, maybe you've got a 15% decay, right? And that could be if the course of a competition over a period of a day. It could be, time between rounds, right? But you're going to the end of a bout, your power output is not the same, right? So it's decayed. So if we add all those together, that gives us that framework. And so with each of those, we want to split those outputs into mechanical, neurological, and metabolic components. And the metabolic one, I think, is where a lot of people just drive to right up front in thinking that's always the pure answer for that. And there's so many different arenas. We've got at a cellular level, mitochondrial biogenesis.
Just before we get into the real weeds here, could you break down that triptych for people? Just assume that they don't have a background in physiology. What do you mean by mechanical? What do you mean by metabolic? And what do you mean by neurological? Like, why would those three things affect power output and your ability to keep on doing the same thing time and again?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just go really basic. Muscle cross-section, your muscle size. It's a pretty strong predictor of absolute force. Not the be-all and end-all. Like I said, I performed a lot of lifts at a way lighter weight than other individuals. But from a mechanical perspective, that's one of the biggest areas. So our trainability, doing hypertrophy focused resistance training, working on, like Mike Israetel would be a great person to follow on that. Mechanical tension, volume, those are going to play a role in, that corresponding what we call the sarcomeres, like increasing the level and that cross-sectional size of that. That is going to increase our absolute force. The angle of the muscle. And you may not have that much of an impact, no impact when it comes to physiology, which would be the attachment points, literally the insertion points into the muscles, where it does allow some people to have a greater level of power output, but also they may fatigue a lot faster due to the steeper angles into the tissue. But it's important to keep those things in place because you're going to have differences in force and velocity from athlete to athlete. And so understanding that you've got different relationships, the muscle fiber composition. So a lot of people are familiar with type 2 and type 1 fibers. That contributes to your max power, your rate of force development.
Slow twitch and fast twitch?
Yep, slow twitch and fast twitch. So your trainability. And you can train those fibers to act like one or the other, but how much, recruitment ability do we have of that? So like if we want to increase explosive force development, for example, we might be doing some isometrics, things of that nature to enhance that, if that is the goal that we're trying to increase for that performance aspect. Tendon stiffness and elastic storage. That is a key to determine explosive movement efficiency. So short contact sports like judo, wrestling, things of that nature would be great examples.
Or even running or hurdling or something like that.
If we go back to the muscle angle, wrestlers, judo, things of that nature, increased force potential, reduced shortening velocity. And with this, that would be training with eccentrics, Nordics, flywheel eccentrics, things of that nature would be a great call. Increasing that force development, decreasing force loss, plyometrics, heavy eccentrics, isometrics all have a place with that.
So all these things are essentially mechanical because it's how your
body... I'm talking about all the mechanical. Yeah. Intramuscular coordination, our synchronization to be able to fire recruitment, so being able to coordinate muscles together, that's going to play a role. Intermuscular coordination, connective tissue length, the quality of the ligaments and fascia, those are all going to play a role in this. So certainly important for grappling, scrambles, things of that nature. Increasing that force fidelity, the increase in joint support is going to be massive, being able to manage that over time. So neurological contributors, think about neurological drive. I mean, just those things like being able to really approach something with fierce intent. We can drive our CNS, right? So, crushing a barbell handle with your hand, boom, really driving that closed is going to have an impact on the movement versus just loosely setting it in your hand and trying to drive. Being aware of those factors that are going to employ that motor unit recruitment. And we can stimulate that. It's not just a biological driver. There's certainly some biology that goes into this, but I just gave a conscious cue to an exercise that would increase that, right? You want to crush that deadlift, crush that bar in your hands. It's going to have an impact on it.
Slapping yourself in the face would be another example that some people use to increase their neurological drive.
Yep. Firing frequency, rate of coding. So greater firing supports a sustained output. It's essential for like clinches, submissions, intermuscular coordination again. Premotor planning, anticipatory activation. So
what is that?
Learning those pathways over and over again. That ties back to that early phases too of learning grappling. That's a great example of that. And then being able to visualize, doing those drills over and over, ingraining these motor patterns so that it's not new, that it's just happening really fast and efficiently. And visualization is absolutely tremendous for these sorts of things. Do you do any visualization before you have a match?
Not necessarily before a match, but certainly when I'm trying to work out the kinks of a technique. The whole pre-match visualization has never really worked for me, but for me it seems to work more at the technical level. Maybe I'm just doing it wrong.
Whatever works, stick with it. So, neural drive. I was just talking about some physical cues for that, but how you approach that physiological state for motivation, arousal, those all have an impact on that. So being able to stimulate that CNS and have an impact on that. If you're stepping into something that you don't care to be doing or walking through, guess what? You're going to fatigue out faster. It's just that simple. We've got reflexive inhibition, the Golgi tendon organ, so desensitization. Elite athletes can access force that the body normally blocks. That's one of the reasons elite strength athletes can maybe lift so much, is desensitizing these inhibition within our body that's trying to protect us, just constantly working that and preparing the body to be able to, that's safe. I can still put my force into it. We're going to have an impact on that. So trainability, heavy lifting does that. Like when you first start lifting, for example, everything feels heavy.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, actually, this isn't heavy. Like it just over time, it's like when you first start, like, so a lot of people use this rate of perceived effort as a, hey, here's the stopping point. I want you to, if this feels 8 out of 10, that's where we're going to stop. Well, you can't use that with people that are untrained or new to training, because guess what? Everything feels like a 10.
Yeah.
So it's really, just training heavy can be actually increase that force output and have an impact on this capacity component.
So I imagine that, a lot of people, when they start weightlifting for the first time, they go from benching 100 pounds to benching 150 pounds within a month. So clearly that rate of progress doesn't continue as you're training. But I imagine that most of your gains in that first month or two would be neurological, exactly what you've been talking about here.
Exactly. So for grapplers, overcoming isometrics, loaded stretches. So it's not just being able to, get in a position. You need to be able to apply force in those positions, and teaching the body to be able to access force in those positions is absolutely critical. So those would be the neurological. Once we get into metabolic, we've got, your heart, your stroke volume, heart rate efficiency, blood volume, plasma expansion, respiration exchange, oxygen extraction, the capillary network, which I talked about. We can actually affect that and grow more capillaries to supply. So just look at the bodybuilders and all the capillaries that are supplying that muscle. They can go in and do intense, crazy workouts with massive volumes for periods of time that the normal body would not be able to do. And then we get down to the cellular level, what's happening with mitochondrial density, enzyme activity, ATP production. This is something where high volume, low intensity work has a huge impact. Sprint interval training. We can target mitochondrial through blood flow restriction protocols. And you can, affect this with your lifestyle and things of that nature. If you're not getting simple things like a good amount of sunlight and good quality foods that are, lowering reactive oxygen species, just good cellular health has a huge impact on what's happening from your ability to process at a cellular level. Diaphragmatic fatigue. This is frequently neglected. It is a muscle just like anything else, that diaphragm. And that diaphragm has an impact on respiration, stabilization, and your sphincter. We'll skip the last one. We don't need to go into that here. So when I was talking about my squat, that 1,000-pound squat, and about ready to pass out, it's because I was fatiguing my diaphragm from the stabilization, but it still needs to do the respiration component, right? I have a lot of my diaphragm is super stiff and strong. It takes a long time for me to warm up. So like when I start sprinting and running or go for a big hike, I will be like struggling for like 20 minutes in.
It's because your diaphragm is used to creating intrathoracic pressure to stabilize your spine.
And it takes a long time for it to warm up to that type movement. And it's like, I'm going for a hike and I'm like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, finally, I'm like, okay, now we're ready. And it'll just be smooth sailing after that. But that first bit, I've had to retrain my diaphragm as I've switched from heavy lifting to be able to get it more pliable and break that in. That is something that I know a few other coaches in the industry that work with some very high level MMA folks. And you'll see some athletes, they don't kick in, they don't get their second wind till like they're dragging. And then towards the end of the fight, all of a sudden it's like they come on. Those athletes might need to be doing some drills ahead of time to actually really kind of push and get to that level. And that may be, with some breathing drills or on a bike or something that really pushes them to a point where it opens up and then that diaphragm is actually warmed up so that they're stepping into the match ready. And it might be doing some pretty challenging work pre-match for those individuals. Have you seen that?
I've actually seen the opposite, like people who never have a second wind, ever.
Okay.
And that would be me, right? Like if I'm doing 400-meter sprints, my first will always be my best. And then the second one is never as good as the first. For me, the best I've ever done in jiu-jitsu tournaments, there's been barely any warm-up. Yet other people, they need to be dripping in sweat before they perform their best. And I think it obviously is a mental component there. It's whatever works for you mentally. But I think there's also some physiological stuff going on that I don't understand.
I think that is a signal to me that we need to actually do some strengthening in your diaphragm and building some more that balances on the other side of that. And we need to build that. So for me, like if I'm doing 200-meter sprints, it's my third or fourth one before I'm finally hitting my groove. So, and then I can keep going too. Right. So loaded breathing drills.
What do you mean loaded breathing drills?
So we might be doing some challenging, like let's do a dead bug, and we're put a load in our hands, go up overhead where we're really challenging the position to maintain the pelvis to rib cage position. So the diaphragm has to engage to create the stabilization so that you don't open up. And we've got a load that we're fighting, and now working on this expansion. We could put a restrictive sheath around the outside, so something like the breathe belt, or if you wanted to be super simple, standing with a band on a rack and a band wrapped around the other side around your waist. And then just breathing and trying to expand outward against that band, right? So it's either challenging position that the diaphragm would need to hold or physically working the diaphragm against a resistance. So you could wrap a knee wrap, maybe around your waist and expand hard into that, hold that. So those are some different approaches to that.
Why are you wearing a complete tight rubber suit in the gym? We're all God's children, and don't kink shame me.
So the breathe belt is this. It's just a Velcro belt with an expandable material. It's pretty large, and that's actually something we use to teach athletes as well, because the rigid belts, people want to put them on too tight and it actually compresses, and it's what we want to do is be able to expand outwards. So that teaches the expansion into it, right? Because you expand outwards. Then you could do something like one of my favorites is like just a simple pause squat. So this would be taking 50% of your normal squat weight. This is tremendous. This is an incredible one. Squat down, not the squat where you're relaxing on your legs. So you have to be still holding tension, but a full deep squat, but you're not like relaxed out. You're holding all the position. Now count to 5. And you've got to stay expanded. So before you squat, you expand your diaphragm, you expand your belly. So this is not a giant breath into your chest. So it's not this thing, right? It is making this big, giant, pregnant belly. So you were pushing out in our oblique. So if you take your hand like this, I've got an L shape for our listeners, and I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to put it into my oblique, and then I'm going to put my index finger into my low belt line in the front. That low belt line would be, as you're going down into the squat, it would be your stomach where you would be pushing against your legs. So you want to think about as you go into this squat that you're pushing your belly into your legs to stop you at the bottom of the lift, or pushing to create that contact sooner while still expanding outwards in the obliques. So if I take my obliques, take my thumbs and I stick them into my sides and I expand outwards, my thumbs will move about 2 to 3 inches outwards on each side. I'll display that really quick for those watching this. Okay. So, see me in frame there? Here's my thumbs, and now I'm going to expand.
Right.
Okay. Now I'm going to go here, low belt line right below there, and okay, now I'm going to go here, and then as I squat, I'm pushing right here, closing this gap, okay? It's 50% of your squat weight. Go down, keep tension, count to 5, come back up.
And are you breathing in that low squat position?
No. Well, yes, you can breathe. You can breathe over the top of that. So you can keep the diaphragm. So what happens when we're doing this, I'm cueing the diaphragm to descend and create pressure. So when you first start doing this, do it without breath, because breath can be a cheat where if we're taking a big breath, we're actually creating more intrathoracic pressure if we take it into our chest. I want to be able to separate so we can teach the diaphragm just to descend by itself. Okay. So it's great to practice this up front with no breathing. All right. Then once you can master that, you can start breathing over the top. So to demonstrate here, see, I'm talking and I'm breathing over the top of keeping this all inflated. And that creates a little bit of, a little bit of skill and mastery. So a set of 5 with a 5 count. That's a lot of time under tension with load, keeping that in position. It will be incredibly demanding.
It's so interesting because
count to 5, or have somebody count to 5, because you will be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up. Don't relax and bounce out of it. So that would be some examples of those. And you can see how much you're training the diaphragm in the course of this.
Yeah. I mean, I guess simplistically, when you were doing your 1 rep max lift, you weren't breathing, but you were still using your diaphragm to generate that pressure in your abdominal cavity and in your thoracic cavity. But when you were doing your 60 deadlifts in a minute, now you have to breathe as well as using your diaphragm to maintain that pressure. So you don't often think of powerlifters as breathing during their performance, but they do.
So it's a great discussion. It's a continuum. So you think about a dial, 0 to 10. All right. 0 is 100% respiration. 10 is 100% stabilization. We can go to 10. You can't actually go to 0 because people would think, oh, running's 100% respiration. Well, if you weren't stabilized, your upper body would fall over. Right. So there is a component there. But let's go endurance running on one end, 1 rep max on the other. Doing a kettlebell snatch somewhere in the middle, a snatch test. Like, you're going to be having a super stiffness point when you pulse it, but you're also going to have a breathing during the movement. If I'm doing a 3 rep max, or, I might hold my breath that whole time. If I'm doing a 5 rep max, I might do 2 reps, take a breath, 2 reps, take a breath. Like, so you're always somewhere on this continuum, because the more stabilization you use, the less respiration. So it's finding that balance. If I'm doing a 20 rep squat, it's going to be a balance in there. I'm going to be probably taking a breath at each repetition, right? Timed appropriately so that it's not detracting from the stabilization or it's overlaid, right? So there's some nuance there, because there is no right answer. It's wherever we're falling on that continuum, but understanding that continuum is using this resource that we want to train.
So if we zoom out and look at this, we create a new continuum from extreme strength sports, and we'll say 1 rep deadlift or 1 rep squat, 1 rep max for your squat, which you've done, and then the extreme endurance at the other end, be that maybe the marathon or ultra running or cycling. The received wisdom is that most people, you take some guy off the street, you can increase his strength and endurance at the same time, but that at either end you have to start getting much more selective. I mean, most endurance athletes do some strength training, but when Kipchoge broke the 2-hour marathon time, he wasn't doing 1 rep max anything. And when I'm assuming that when you were getting ready for setting your records or competing for your 1 rep max, you weren't doing any sprinting, you weren't doing any jogging. You're probably even limiting how much you walk in a day.
Not necessarily. But to your point, yes. But movement is such an incredible recovery tool. Like not walking would be a really poor choice.
Okay.
Like taking time to do that sort of stuff is a massive recovery. But I would figure out ways to. So this is where like the blood flow restriction can come in, and other things that aren't going to take away from some of those demands. I also know numerous ultra marathoners that are just absolutely dedicated to strength training, because they're not going to be able to pull that off if they don't have, the things that we talked about, like the capillaries in the muscle, the strength to support it, so I think that there's more going on each of those ends than we may perceive. But at the same time, you are absolutely right. When we really super hyper specialize in one end of the spectrum or the other, there's going to be some significant deficits. You're not going to take a power lifter out and do a 400 meter or a mile and see anything remotely looking athletic, right? With a number of them. I think there's a little bit of context and nuance to that discussion, but I wouldn't disagree with you.
Well, what advice would you have for the people who are in the middle? Wrestling, or maybe CrossFit, or maybe firefighting. There's the energetic demands of firefighting. You might have to go for an hour, humping up and down stairs, carrying bottles up to the 20th story of a building that's on fire. Or you might need to kick down a door or drag somebody out for 50 feet. And that's actually incredibly difficult to do, especially if you're wearing gear and it's over uneven terrain. So for people trying to train in the middle, how can they, how would you suggest that they train? And that's a gigantic question. But what would you say as a specialist who has worked with generalists? What advice would you give to structuring your training for the generalist?
So I think a bigger, more important piece of that is, in practice, what I see is not necessarily the energy demands and maximizing that as much as reducing things that are non-additive or end up hurting us by doing, hey, I'm over here strength training and I'm doing it in such a way that I'm overloading some muscles. That's then creating a deficit or potential injury that ends up holding me back, right? So it's, how do I get the components of the value from this without overdoing it?
So can you give an example here?
So I think your firefighter, police, fire, military is an incredible example. You need to be strong. You need to be able to, pull a comrade out, out of a fire or a dangerous situation. If you don't, it's a life or death thing. But if I tweak my shoulder bench pressing too heavy, and I have to, and I'm incapable of, performing my job for a few weeks, if I'm overtrained, I'm sore, That's the worst thing you can do. Like I don't want to take a person that's, in the military, supposed to be deploying, and have them injured, their backs, their backs hurting, they can't carry, so that is the mismanagement of that. And that's where it gets really hard when you're managing all those different demands. Right. And this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, of how do you manage that best as possible? And that's one of the things that I did with Kabuki, was trying to create tools that get joints in the right position, that create these things to happen automatically without having to spend all this time personalized, like coaching, refining movement patterns, reducing the negative outcomes of the training. Because if I've got too much load in a poor position, that's going to end up resulting in this, right? So how can I minimize the poor position? The other aspect of that is, how do I just manage the loading? How do I manage the technique? And so I'm going to go into something of a sales pitch here, which I hadn't intended, but the output of that was really over 10 years of developing a system for managing training variables and load. And a lot of this comes down to also recognizing where we're at on any given day, knowing exactly where your recovery is, and matching your training adaptation needs to what you need. And that's a really hard thing to do without a coach in the room. And even a coach may not be able to see all of that. That might be like, if you're working with a trainer, you come in, they go, how'd you sleep? How's your week been? Trying to get this assessment of where are you at based on all those other stressors in life, to be able to match that. You mentioned, hey, that first you started at a 100-pound bench and then you're at 150, within a few months. Well, you're not a 150-pound bencher. You might be a 147 or 153, or a rough night with kids, or you fight with the boss and you're at 135. It varies all over the place, right? So what's really unique is we're talking about some of the neurology, not just, and the energy systems here. But all of this can actually be monitored by seeing how fast that barbell movement is just this massive indicator into it.
I've seen the guys at Kabuki, and I've seen you train with this. So it's actually a system where you measure, when you're doing a squat, what was the meters per second or the feet per second that bar was moving at. So let's say I squat 3 plates aside, and that's my 2-rep max. And one day the bar moves faster. I do those 3 reps to failure, but the bar is moving, give me a number.
0.3 meters per second.
0.3 meters per second. And the next day I do it, and it's faster. It's moving at 0.4 meters a second. What does that tell me?
It tells you should put more weight on the bar.
At 0.4?
Yes.
Because I'm able to move that same weight faster, so I'm not.
Yep. So the target would be to get towards this. Let's say the training is somewhere in the 0.3 to 0.35 meters, what we're targeting to get that adaptation. The goal isn't necessarily to move that faster. We may be targeting a faster rate if what case the goal is always to add more adaptation to within the desired training range. So if we're moving faster, so if you walk into the gym on any of your warm-ups, we would know what your training weight for that day would be, because it's going to show on all those warm-ups as well. So it's a key into that system. And we could take this even further. So we didn't talk about like what's happening at before an injury happens. Typically it's followed weeks prior with some overload of the muscle tissue. And as that overload starts happening, it's because a muscle started, fatiguing out. And as that happens, there's some chemical releases. And those chemical releases create like a hypoxic state in the muscle or the tissue around it, and also starts inhibiting like the movement of the muscle, the fascia, the nerve movement within that. And those restrictions, this is often kind of called, trigger points, which is not really a good technical term, but that's where some of those chemical releases have created some of that mechanical tension that interferes with that process. not so important, just to explain that there's some significant science behind this. The earliest potential that we also can identify when that happens is a change in rate of acceleration. So not just the 0.3 meters per second, but through the movement, what change? And that change is change in rate of, it's technically the physics term is called the jerk metric. Sounds a little goofy, but if we refined it down with a microscope, you would see that the movement gets micro jerky, right? Because it's the rate of acceleration, if we're mapping that, starts moving. You can't see that with the human eye. Well, we could see that if we're monitoring what that's happened. So we haven't actually talked about this, but that has been the project that I've been working on since leaving Kabuki, is this product called Lift Lab app. So I've been working with some developers over the last 2 years in taking this entire algorithm matrix of what we developed into what we can access with our phone today. So this is like the amazing meld of technology today. So you messaged me on this morning. This camera on the new iPhones has a level within the pixels that we can actually identify on the plate and see how fast the bar's moving. So we have an app now that you set your phone up and it watches you lift. It maps your joint position, gives you feedback on your technique based on joint position to get better and more efficient, and then tells you what weight to put on the bar, and then maps your future training based on what we're seeing for your adaptation over time.
That's amazing, because these accelerometers that you would have to put on the bars before, those were many hundred.
The cheap ones were $500, and the more expensive ones that I worked with the sports teams on were around $2,000. And we can do that now with this. Not all phones. So that's why I don't have it as an Android app, because we can't guarantee the camera that you're using, which is critical because it has to have the level of pixels to be able to be accurate enough to do that. But we're able to do that. And then we're just using the AI pose estimation, it being able to figure out where the joints are in the camera is what we're using there. And then mapping that joint position. And now we look at that joint position of that lift that we would anticipate in your squat, your deadlift, whatever the movement, and being able to go, hey, this knee is caving in. You're bending over too far. You've got a gap in stabilization. We've got a weakness in your adductors. We're going to start actually changing your program to start developing your adductor strength to get you into this position. And what's that going to do? Well, that's going to enhance a weakness that you've got, also improve your skill level because now you're able to perform better. And we're going to map and manage your training literally on a daily basis. So we don't even tell you what the velocity is because it's non-consequential. That gets super, what do you need to know? Put 5 more pounds on the bar. Put 10 more pounds on the bar. It's time to call it. That is what we're doing with this. It's absolutely incredible. We don't have to know what you're doing in the jiu-jitsu gym because it's going to show up over here on the training side, right? Is that cool?
That's incredible. Does it take into account, I mean, I don't know, let's say your femur is proportionally much longer than the average person and mine is much shorter than the average person. That's going to change our form and our technique. Does it take stuff like that into account?
It starts creating a custom tailored, so every user ends up with their own training program. We call it hyper individualized training. Because all these other apps out there, they're just like you pick a program, you follow it, They might change the loading or the other stuff, but ours is actually hyper individualizing to the individual because we're seeing your movement, we're seeing your response to adaptation. And then when I was talking through all that, this is why I was able to start diving into the science on the conditioning side of it, because we're actually building that in there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that you go, hey, you know what I want to do? My plan is to be able to do a hike that's going to have, X many miles at certain elevation at this time. And we can actually build your training program so that in the gym, we can see your work capacity development planning it to a point to achieve that objective. We don't have that in there right now.
No,
so just
that's insane.
That's future. That's what we're developing. But that's why I could literally walk through the formula with you, because we're building that. I mean, our algorithms are, it's freaking crazy. I mean, we've been working on it for
conspiracy theorists with all the lines.
It'd blow your mind. But we've been working on it for 10 years with a team of people. Like, I mean, there's nothing like it in the industry. So
the name of the app is
Lift Lab app. Lift Lab app. You can find it. Go to chrisduffin.com. There's a link there, or there's a link in my profiles on social media. So, sorry for the pitch. It just it's really relative to the questions that you were asking here. So,
but when you're getting this technical about the balancing all these number of different things, at least gives people something concrete that they can do. You mentioned mitochondrial density, and you mentioned lifting form and acceleration. What the hell do I do with that in my own training?
How do I make that practical? Yeah. Right. And it gets, without managing at an individual level, you know what? Not everybody's going to be able to hire me as a coach for $500 a month, right? I mean, nor do I want that. Like, what is accessible, and also what is realistic? So we use a lot of this in rehab return to play, where it becomes really critical, managing somebody to make sure they're not pushing over the line, but they're still pushing hard to get results, right? Most times somebody needs a trainer, a physical therapist at that time. But not everybody can afford that, nor has the convenience of going, well, that therapist needs to be available at this time because I've got X work schedule and I can't afford the commute to that place. And, at the end of the day, it becomes really challenging for most people to be able to access something. Even I talked about my products. That's why I was okay stepping away from that, because at the end of the day, I had to tell people, you got to buy $5,000 worth of all these specialty bars, build a home gym around that, because they're not in somewhere else, absorb all this education on movement mechanics and $10 courses and do all this. And, somebody's into it, 10 plus grand to create this environment for success. I'm not touching the people that need this the most. Where $29 a month, you've got a high-end personal trainer in your pocket at your convenience that can pop out and create and is managing exactly who you are and what your needs are today and mapping that going forward. That is the amazing thing with the blend of technology and science and where we can do, because we couldn't have done this 3 years ago. It's really, really cool. So I'm super excited about it. And I'll get a discount code for your listeners or something. Do a trial.
Check the show notes, as they say. All right. So the one question that I seem to be asking everybody in this hybrid training series, and you can answer it as quickly or as in-depth as you like. Say you're looking for the middle. You're looking for being strong, and you're looking for the capacity to run a 10K or potentially run a half marathon. Because of your training schedule, you have to lift and you have to do cardio on the same day. Which do you do first? And why?
Okay. Start from the beginning again. Let me re-listen to all of that.
We're trying to find somewhere, we're trying to improve our conditioning so that we can do both strong things and endurance things. We want to be able to run a 10K and be strong in all the conventional powerlifting lifts. On a Wednesday, we have to do cardio and we have to weight train on the same day. Which do you do first? Weight training and then cardio, or cardio and then weight training?
I think that you can do either.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do. It is okay to go for a run and be fighting sore muscles from your training, right? That's okay. It's okay to step into a workout and push through some fatigue. I would not do conditioning to that level immediately followed by the workout. So, If we needed to do that, I would do the training first. But if you're talking about doing a run in the morning and strength training in the afternoon or evening, I think that would work perfectly fine. Work with a number of hybrid athletes that strength train in the morning and do the training later in a fatigued, hey, guess what? My quads are freaking burning because they're just shot because I did squats this morning. That works very well. It works very well. You're probably going to get more out of it. So that would be my preference.
Sorry, what would be your preference?
My preference would be to do the strength training first because you're going to be able to get that adaptation. And then the fatigue carryover to the conditioning will not counteract the conditioning. It's all about being in that fatigue state sooner. So just recognizing that. Like that's the foundation of, let's say, blood flow restriction, which I've got a book on how to do blood flow restriction on my site. So blood flow restriction training reduces the load that you're training with. So, you put a cuff on, and the magic behind it is literally it just puts you in a deeper state of fatigue sooner. So I don't have to train as long or with as much weights. But guess what? I get just as tired, and I get tired faster because I just can't lift the weight anymore, right? I'm still getting that effect. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter that I've reduced the load or that I've reduced how fast I was doing the running, right? I'm still fatigued, and once I'm putting my body in that state of fatigue and I've reached that and I've pushed while in fatigue, I'm going to get the adaptation. And that's why it doesn't matter that much.
I wonder how much of the answer to this, now that I've talked about it with several people, is risk of injury. I mean, yes, you can injure yourself with a squat or a deadlift, but if we're talking about a snatch or a clean and jerk, that's a even more dangerous exercise. I mean, you could drop a barbell on your head, you could break your neck conceivably. So, or if you're running really technical terrain, you're running along mountain trails.
That's exactly what I was thinking through where I had you ask the question again. It gave me a chance to kind of think through that, but I didn't spell that out, but that would be the concern, right? Yeah, if I'm running in a fatigue state and it's like super rocky, like I'm having to pay attention, also my mental is fatigued, so on. Or again, yeah, your exercise selection, you might need to change your exercise selection. And that's also specifically why I started calling out one BFR as an example. I was thinking down that path of going, hey, maybe I actually just want to reduce the load that I'm using to reduce my injury risk as well to get the same effect. And that's where BFR training can come into place and be highly useful. So I think that would be a good thing to cycle in for people doing that, is get some exposure to BFR training from a risk mitigation standpoint and reducing just that joint load on the body too, or the demands on the joints, because I'm doing heavy squats, I've got 3 plates on there and I'm running. Well, if I can do the same workout with 150-pound squats, get the same result, and then I'm still running the 5 miles, I've reduced that demand on the joint, but I've still got the stimulus for adaptation, right? So I think the injury mitigation side of that is the best, and that's going to definitely weigh a role in that. If I had a highly technical run, I would do my strength training after that. If I had a highly technical strength training workout or some heavy high demands, like clean and jerks type thing, I would not want to do that after running. Right? Those would be very clear answers for me in those cases.
In the span of this one conversation, you've mentioned your peptide business, you've mentioned your app business, you mentioned a book on blood flow restriction training. That's a lot. I'm sure there's others. Well, I know there's other stuff as well. How do people get their hands on this or get more information about these different aspects of training?
Yeah. So I try to put everything on chrisduffin.com. I co-founded Kabuki Strength, which I'm not a partner of anymore, Barefoot Shoes, and Build Fast Formula. So when we're talking about raw materials and other components fueling some of the stuff that we're talking about. So capillary growth, vasodilation, the hydrodynamic movement of nutrients to the cells. Build fast, absolutely phenomenal. Those are where my formulas are. I've got a ton of ebooks that I've dropped on chrisduffin.com. So it's just my web store. And then the links for those other things are on there. So I've got a bunch of ebooks on there. And then I've got all the education that I did with Kabuki is linked on there too. So there's an education community. It's absolutely free to join. And I've got tons of courses and hundreds of videos, library completely free. There is a paid portion for $30 a month where you get access to the full 2,000 videos and 300 plus hours of lecture. But the forum and tons of information on that is all just absolutely free. And some of the ebooks that you would pay for on the store are free on there as well if you just join. So that's tremendous. There is a ton of peptide information on there. That's where I do a lot of my articles on peptides and things of that nature. So if you want to learn about that, that's there. I do have 2 very unique mitochondrial-based peptides, so things that enhance your quality of life, longevity, anti-aging type stuff, cellular. Those are on the web store. That's the main place. You should be able to find all that linked on my social media platform. Typically, it's Mad Scientist Duffin, Mad_Scientist_Duffin. So when I say Chris Duffin and Mad Scientist Duffin, that's like muffin, but with a D. Okay. Duffin. So, yeah, hopefully that covers all that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your many, many endeavors.
Thank you. Always a pleasure talking. Hopefully I didn't get too deep in the weeds on this.
That's what this is for.
Okay.
If people want their money back, they could just ask for it, and they will get all the money back that they paid for this.
All right. And I did pull up. So Duffin 50, Duffin 50 will get you 50% off Lift Lab for your first month.
Amazing. So people can try it out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think it's, for what we're talking about here, it's a just absolutely phenomenal tool. I mean, something that would cost you, hundreds of dollars or significantly more to have somebody try to train you at that level.
Amazing.